What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Shuggy from Sugar Earth Media, and today we're going to be ranking the numbered Resident Evil games. As you guys know, big Resident Evil fan. I've played a lot of the games, and I'm a huge fan. Not all the spin-offs, but I do highly enjoy the series. I recently did the new movie review, had mixed feelings on it, enjoyed it overall, but had a lot of issues with it. So if you want to see that review, I'll link it in the iCard, and you guys can check that out. But today, I thought we would rank all of the games that I've played. We're going to do the numbered games and Revelations 1 and 2. And just to simplify things, we're going to deal only with the remakes. And that's purely because I've only played the original RE2, and I didn't even finish it. And I played Code Veronica as well, but we're not going to deal with those two. We're just going to deal with the numbered games and Revelations 1 and 2. Just to simplify things, I think it's enough to talk about for this video. Definitely let me know your own list, how you disagree with me, and how you feel that the list should have been. Definitely want to hear all that in the comments below. This is meant to spark discussion, so let's just jump right into it. Now, this is going to be a controversial pick. I've talked about this in my Resident Evil 4 remake video, how I think that Resident Evil 4 should be remade, and I'll be honest, number 11 on the list, Resident Evil 4. I was not that big into Resident Evil 4. I thought that the tone was majorly clashing. There's a lot about the game that I like, a lot of thematic stuff that is interesting, and the transition to action gameplay, it felt to me like it was a tug of war between somebody who wanted to make it a horror game and somebody who wanted to make an action game. And it didn't feel as cohesive as it should have. It has a lot of really interesting ideas. The whole parasite thing and the villagers being smart, working together. It's the next step up from zombies. That's really great, but there's so much goofiness in it and action silliness. Like, you know, we have the mine carts going through lava, and we got all this ridiculous stuff going on. We got this little guy who speaks ridiculously, and I can't take him seriously, and then we got this big robot dude, he's a big robot, and then he's chasing you as a robot, and all the quick time events, and there's just so many things about it that I just didn't particularly care for. So in all honesty, Resident Evil 4 is dead last on my list. I know that most people are going to disagree with this, and that's okay. But that's just my personal feeling. I only just played Resident Evil 4 for the first time last year, and I didn't care for it that much, I'll be honest. I did enjoy it overall, but it was my least favorite. So next up, above that, is Resident Evil 5. I actually think that Resident Evil 5 was an improvement in the sense that the tone was consistent the whole time. It was an action game through and through, and I think the co-op was a great addition. If you play it with a friend, it's a lot more fun than playing it by yourself. And the action gameplay worked a lot better for me in the sequel. And I do like how it added a little bit to the backstory of Umbrella. And added a whole nother element to it. And, you know, there's a lot of silliness in it. A lot of anime silliness. You still had the backflips and the kicks and the crazy silly stuff going on. But it felt a little bit more consistent with the tone. It was a little less goofy. So that's why I like 5 a little better, guys. And I will say, you know, I'm not a fan of how close the camera is to you. And I'm not a fan of the grayish tone they put on everything. But if you have it on PC, there are ways to mod it. I have it modded so that it is not zoomed up. I have it modded so that there is no color filter. So you can fix those problems if you're playing on PC. So I just want to throw that on there. And after that, I put Resident Evil 6. Of the action-oriented Resident Evils, aside from Village, which we'll get to later, I put this above 5 and 4 because, to me, it is the most fun gameplay. It is extremely polished. There's a lot of different gameplay styles. There's a lot of content in this game. You have 4 different campaigns. Each one is distinct. Each one has different play styles it caters to, and you will have a different experience. It's also co-op, and there's a lot of fun you can have with playing with your friends. There's a lot of side game modes, so there's just a breadth of content in Resident Evil 6, and the presentation value is extremely good. The story is very silly, but again, the tone is consistent. There's a lot of silliness, but the consistency does a lot for me. I will say that, you know, the Jake's campaign is the weakest by far of the storylines. There's so much stupid stuff in in the storylines in this game, but there's a lot of variety in terms of gameplay. You got like stealth, you have melee, you have guns, of course, you have some degree of inventory management, you have you have fun action scenes, you got vehicle segments, you got ridiculous boss battles, you have an entire campaign with Chris that is unlike any other in Resident Evil, in that it's like a Gears of War cover-based shooter, and there are enemies shooting back at you. So there's a cover-based system. There's a lot of systems in this game, and most of them work pretty well, and it gels just fine. The cover is a little difficult to deal with by modern standards, but at the time it was pretty decent. So I will say I enjoyed Resident Evil 6 of the action games the most. So right above that, we put Resident Evil 0. Now, this is a prequel to the original, and it is in the same style as the Resident Evil 1 remake. However, in general, I prefer the survival horror installments of these games, but Resident Evil 0 is dead last for me of the survival horror games, because there's a lot of features that I didn't particularly care for. There are no item boxes in this game, so you have to do a lot of backtracking to go back to get items that you had dropped before. Apparently this is how Resident Evil was supposed to be originally, but they invented the item boxes because people were getting frustrated with it. Why they thought it was a good idea to put it in this game, I don't know. So I don't like that. It's frustrating to have to backtrack so much, especially the first time you play it through. You simply do not know what the game's going to bring to you next. So there's no way for you to anticipate what you're going to need. So it's very silly. There's also like enemies in the sewer part where you have to, they can jump out randomly. It's RNG at any time. Well, it's not at any time. There's a few points where they can show up, but you can't predict in advance which of them it's going to be, and you have to have a rocket or some high-power weapon with you. A shotgun is not enough. They jumped out at me, I used the pistol, it wasn't enough. I brought the shotgun the second time they got me, and they still killed me. So it's this one enemy that's extremely powerful, is a very cheap trick, and you have to have a rocket launcher on you, and you have to know in advance that this is going to happen. So I didn't particularly care for that particular element. And they had this thing where they have two playable characters, right? And you can switch between them. You can even control them at the same time using the thumbsticks. But I felt like that feature is a little underutilized. It didn't really end up being as important to the game as it really should have been if they're going to do the multiple player characters thing. The story, I didn't feel really added that much to Resident Evil as a whole. So that's why, part of the reason why I would say it's not the greatest. But I did enjoy it overall. But it also, there's the opening segment is in a train. So it's a very tight corridors. And, if you're just getting started in this game, I feel like it's a little unfair to start you in such a tight space. It's difficult to navigate without getting killed, and to start off a game like that, I feel it's a little too hard. And honestly, a train, not really great for a survival horror game where you're going to be trying to evade enemies and stuff like that. So I don't know, it felt a little cheap to me. So that's why it's last on the list. Now above RE0, I put Revelations 1, and this is a spin-off game that I highly enjoyed. It fuses together survival horror and action in an interesting way, and it expands the universe and adds so much to the story. That's why I wanted to include Revelations in this list, because it shows the global fight against biological warfare, and it shows at a bigger scale how the characters are fighting back against this, and it shows the government perspective. It shows the corruption that led to an attack and why these government agents were staging attacks so that they could get more funding. And they're the good guys in their mind because they're using that funding to fight actual bioterrorism. So they're creating bioterrorism, but in their minds they're doing the right thing. So it really made a lot of sense. There's a lot of goofiness in this. The humor didn't really work for me. But the only reason it's this low is because gameplay-wise, it was designed for the DS, and playing it on the consoles and stuff, it's too easy. Honestly, it's like the easiest Resident Evil game that there is. On the hardest difficulty, I breezed through it. It was no issue for me. So I don't know how you guys felt about it, but that's why I put it lower on this list. The story and everything, it's actually one of the better stories, I think, in Resident Evil. I really like getting a wider perspective of the bioterrorism fight. So I like that a lot. So above Revelations 1, I've put Resident Evil 3. And remember, with 1 through 3, we're going to be talking only about the remakes just for simplicity's sake. So the remake of number 3 I thought was good. I really enjoyed it. And it's very polished. It's on the same engine as RE2 and all that. And I think it's a very good technically, it's a great game. I will say it's a little brief. It's short on content. It doesn't have any side games or any like mini games or any DLC. It did include a multiplayer game, but we're not talking about the multiplayer games right now. So I felt like the game was a little too short, and it cut out some content from the original. But again, we're not really talking about that. So it's a really fun game. I really like it. I will say it's a little more on rails than some of the other Resident Evil games, and that's why it's not as good as like Resident Evil 1 or 2, which give you a little bit more freedom to move around. It is based on a lot of set pieces. So one thing that's really great about Resident Evil games is they're almost as fun to replay as they are to play the first time, because it's all I think of it as like an obstacle course. You're trying to get through it more efficiently, and you're trying to come up with strategies to get through it faster, with taking no damage and using your weapons the most efficient way. So I really like that obstacle course element. But the fact that this game is so on rails, there's less strategizing happening. So that's why it's a little lower for me. Even though I enjoyed the story, the presentation value, these recent run of Resident Evil games have done much better at having the story and presentation and acting be a lot more to modern standards, and it does away with some of the like cheesiness of the original games, which, nothing wrong with that. It's supposed to be the B-movie aesthetic, but I'm happy to be moving away from that and to take it a little bit more seriously and earnestly, and I really appreciate that. So yeah, overall I really like RE3. I replayed it many times. I got all the achievements and stuff. It's a fun game, but it's a little short, so that's my only real complaint about it. In the final boss battle, dude, on harder difficulties, what the fuck were they thinking, dude? I'm still get angry when I think about it. But yeah, overall, an enjoyable game. Highly recommend it. But it's not the first I would recommend, So above Resident Evil 3, we put Revelations 2. Now, this game was a sequel to Revelations in some ways in terms of gameplay, but it really is kind of an unrelated thing. It took place on an island. It has a very different aesthetic from the rest of the Resident Evil games. It has more of a grindhouse, gore-fest type of feel, and it has, it's a bit more like disturbing and horrifying in some ways, and I really appreciate that element of it. It is also a game that tried to be a co-op game, and there's like basically there's two sets of two characters. So, and it brought back Barry, which is a fun character from the first game, and it brought back Claire, so it brought back two favorite characters that are kind of underutilized in the series. So I was happy to have them back. It tells an interesting story. It's the same writer who did Revelations 1, and I'm glad it did something different. It has a few different ways to play. It has stealth combat. It expands the a repertoire of Resident Evil a little bit, and it has some melee characters. There's basically one character who does all the combat and one support character, so I forget the names of the characters right now, but Claire is with this other girl who can only do melee, and it's interesting to have that dynamic, but it's a little limiting as well, especially if you're playing on co-op. So, especially when you're with Barry, the number 2 character is this kid, and basically the kid can see certain things, like shiny objects, that to lead Barry to certain things, to collectibles, and the kid can also see there are invisible enemies, which is one of my pet peeves in gaming, is when we have invisible enemies, but at least this game lets you have a support character that can see them, so you have to switch to the support character to see where these invisible enemies are, and then take it out as Barry. So, I had mixed feelings about the support character element to it. So that's the only reason why it's maybe not a little higher. I will say this game has absolutely the best raid mode in any of the Resident Evil games. Raid mode is just you go through these levels and you fight these enemies and you try to do it fast without taking damage, and you try to get through the game as fast as you can. And it reuses levels from the game and also from Resident Evil 6, and it's just a really addicting game mode. I still go back and play it sometimes. So I highly enjoy the raid mode. It's probably the best part about the game, if I'm being honest. I really, really love that raid mode. And I was hoping Resident Evil Village, when they announced the Mercenaries mode, I was hoping it would be like this raid mode, and it wasn't. It kind of disappointed me in that way, because I love this raid mode so much, and I just want them to make this a standard in every Resident Evil game going forward, but they have yet to do so. But, all good. Right above Revelations 2, I put Resident Evil Village. This is one of my favorite games in the series. It's number 8, so it counts as a number 1, that's why it's on the list. And I really, really love the mixture between action and horror. They did it in such a way, this to me is what Resident Evil 4 should have been. Just that perfect mixture where they complement each other and they don't work against each other. There's no goofiness. There's a bit of goofiness, but it's done in a way that doesn't detract from the horror element, doesn't detract the action element, adds to the horror, and it has some horror segments as well. And I really like what they did with Ethan's story and expanding on that. And they had a continuing, it's like the second part of a trilogy, and it's leading into having this continuing narrative through the games. I'm really enjoying, and I love the cliffhanger and what we're going to see in the next one. I'm really curious about. So I like how it reveals things about Resident Evil 7's story and leads into the next installment in an interesting way, and I'm really curious to see. And I really like, there's a segment where you play as Chris, and it's really cool. And even they did a little fake out with the Chris thing, and they did a little twist that I enjoyed. Some people aren't going to enjoy it, some people are. So overall, I really, really enjoyed Resident Evil Village, and it's one of my favorites. And looking forward to the DLC, I'll tell you that. But above Resident Evil Village, I put Resident Evil 7 as number 3. I love this game. It's one of the best horror games ever made. It's intense. Just that feeling of being chased by these immortal enemies. There's nothing like it. And I love how it reboots the series, because it is similar to the old ones. It is old school, but it's also completely new, because it's a new perspective. We're first person for the first time ever. So I really like that it's similar to the old ones, but it's also completely new at the same time. And they do a really great job of subverting expectations. You go in, you're like, oh, we're rescuing his significant other. And, of course, we immediately assume, oh, yeah, well, she's going to be dead, right? Or we're making all these guesses, and nobody guesses it. Like, you watch all these playthroughs, nobody guesses what happens. That she shows up almost immediately and then tries to kill you. And having these immortal enemies that just won't die is just so interesting to me. And I really, it's one of the most terrifying games ever to me. Just that feeling of being chased is extremely intense. And then I like how it ends as more of a classic Resident Evil, and you get the guns and you're shooting at stuff. And the molded are an interesting enemy. I like that we have mold instead of viruses or parasites, we have something new and different. And I really think that the story was very well done overall, and some cool twists and turns in there. And it's just a very unique game, and it's just one of my favorites, just straight up. So I like that it's old, and it's like old Resident Evil games, but it's completely new, and it's a nice mixture of old and new, and it's not afraid to try new things, and it's just absolutely terrifying. So I love it. Yeah. So right above Resident Evil 7, I put the Resident Evil 2 remake. I really like this game. It's one of my favorite games of all time. I really like, again, it's that same mixture of old and new. It's new in a lot of ways from the original Resident Evil 2, but it does a really great job at giving you a world to explore, and it has a good execution on its story, and it's just quintessential survival horror, collecting items, solving puzzles, and just making plans. You're like, oh, I need to take this here. What do I need to get there? And it's just the obstacle course aspect I mentioned. This is the perfect obstacle course. You have to memorize everything. I have like a whole notebook of each playthrough. We did it live on stream where I was like, I'll beat this in less than 2 hours. And I would have if I didn't have to redo some of the boss battles a couple times. So I really enjoy this game quite a lot. So I highly recommend it for anybody. And it's one of the best zombie games ever made. And it's just absolutely amazing. I love the Tyrant as well. The Tyrant is such a great way to spice it up. You have all these zombies, you have these creatures you know how to deal with, and then all of a sudden this guy you can't kill shows up. I mean, it's so brilliant. I love it. So yeah, I highly recommend it. And it's one of my favorite games of all time, absolutely. And there's a bunch of bonus content in the game as well. You have multiple campaigns, and you have to finish both campaigns to get the ending. There's 4 campaigns overall, but really it's just 2. With some variations, and then you have to finish 2 of them to get the true ending, and even then there's stuff to unlock. You got bonus game modes and stuff that were added as free DLC that are really cool. So yeah, it's just one of the best horror games ever made, and it's the quintessential zombie survival horror game, and it's just amazing. I love it. And right above that, I put Resident Evil 1 as my favorite Resident Evil game. And this is simply because, in terms of design, it's just one of the best games ever made. It has the perfect maze-like environment. And you have to unlock all these different areas. You have to explore and navigate. You have to make plans. You're like, okay, I know there's 1 zombie here, 2 zombies here. I know there might be a Crimson Head here. And you have to make battle plans going in. And you have to adjust as it goes. And the fixed camera, I really enjoy. I like that we've gotten past that. As much as I like the fixed camera, the Resident Evil 2 over-the-shoulder stuff is probably, and the first-person stuff is probably the way to go moving forward. But I do enjoy that fixed camera aspect. It gives the environments a unique feel. And, of course, they always hide enemies just off screen, so when it changes camera angles, you're like, oh! So it's just such an inventive game, such incredible design, and each of the characters has their own little abilities. And the remake added the whole Crimson Head thing, where if you kill an enemy but you don't burn it, or you don't shoot off its head, it might come back as a Crimson Head, which is a super powered zombie. So you really need to use your ammo sparingly. And just having that whole inventory management aspect where you can only carry so many items, it really just adds to the strategy. There's so much strategy involved. You have to think things through. You have to be like, I need this item. I should bring these weapons with me. I know I'm going to have to face these enemies. And again, it's got that obstacle course aspect that makes it so replayable. And it's just one of the best games I ever made. And it's got so many twists and turns to it. I mean, the story has some cheesy dialogue, but in general, it's very well done and has some cool twists at the end. And it's just one of the best games ever made, guys. I don't know what else to say. I mean, it is the survival horror game. if you've never played a survival horror game before, Resident Evil, the remake on Steam, that is the one to go to. If you never played one before, this is the survival horror game. This is the founder of the genre. Now, I know that they were trying to emulate past games, and it's not like anybody else didn't have this idea, but it is just such a perfectly designed game. It has so many good design elements to it, and it's just so easy to recommend. So that's why I give it the first place on the list. Although, you know, nowadays maybe Resident Evil 2 might be a better recommendation just because people need to be more used to the shooting aspect. But the environments and the detail in the environments, there is more areas, there's more puzzles in the first game. So I almost have to say first game goes first. So that's why I ranked it this way. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I would love to hear your rankings and why you disagree with me. That is perfectly fine. And why you love Resident Evil 4 the best. That's totally fine as well. But yeah, guys, let me know what you think. And sub for more videos. We do a lot of horror stuff, so keep it locked on Shook Earth Media. If you like that kind of thing, hit like if you like it. And I hope to see you guys in the next video. Alright, peace out, everybody. Have a good one.